Work starting at noon Eastern with work on several oil and gas drilling measures. Also a bill limiting the authority of federal agencies to issue new regulations. And now live to the U.S. Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O Lord, our God, ever living and ever giving, strengthen us to enter into your purpose and to bring blessings to our world. Kindle such flames of sacred love within the hearts of our senators that they will be motivated by their passion to please you. Amid all that is transient and temporal, keep them loyal to the transcendent and eternal. May they test their actions by their conscience and by the wisdom of your word and spirit. Lord, strengthen them in every endeavor, empowering them in all that pertains to that righteousness which exalts a nation. Bind them together in the oneness of a shared commitment to you. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 25, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 467, the middle class tax cut of 2012.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 467, S3412, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide tax relief to middle-class families.
Madam President, we're now in the midst of another Republican filibuster, so the time until 2:15 today will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees. Republicans will control the first 30 minutes, and the majority will control the second 30 minutes. At 2:15, there will be a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to the middle-class tax cut that was just outlined by the clerk. S3429 is at the desk and due for a second reading.
Clerk will report.
S3429, a bill to require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to establish a Veterans Job Corps and for other purposes.
Madam President, I would object to any further proceedings with respect to this legislation.
Objection is heard. The bill will be placed on the calendar.
Madam President, for the third time in as many weeks, Republicans are poised to kill a tax cut without ever debating it on the Senate floor. 2 weeks ago, Republicans filibustered legislation to cut taxes for small businesses. Last week, they filibustered a bill to end tax breaks for corporations that ship jobs overseas and cut taxes for companies that move jobs back to America. And now they're filibustering our plan to cut taxes for 114 million middle-class families. Not one of these bills has gotten a debate on the Senate floor. So let's look at what led to this latest Republican filibuster. 2 weeks ago, Senator McConnell came to the Senate floor to ask for two votes. One on the Democratic plan to cut taxes for 98% of American families and reduce the deficit by about $1 trillion. And the other vote he wanted was one on the Republican plan to raise taxes by $1,000 each for 25 million middle-class families, while handing out tax breaks to millionaires of $160,000 each. That afternoon, I told the majority leader that Democrats were willing to give Republicans what they wanted, those 2 votes. But although it had been only a few short hours since Senator McConnell asked for those 2 votes, my offer was refused. He said he had to see our proposal first. It seemed like a thin excuse at the time. He hadn't seen our proposal when he asked for the votes in the first place. But others within his caucus had seen it, and the staff had seen it, of course. But I took the minority leader at his word. So Democrats produced legislation in legislative form, and we offered once again to vote on our bill and on the Republicans' plan to hike middle-class taxes. Again, they refused the up or down votes that they had asked for. And this time they wanted a 3rd vote now on a different plan, we're told. Madam President, we have President Obama's tax plan before us. They're not going to make up some tax plan with the president that they say they're going to do. We have President Obama's tax plan. We have worked hand in glove with him now for months to come to the body with what we have today. So this 3rd vote is, again, a charade. The presiding officer has a couple small children. My children aren't so small anymore, but small children are small children. And it's very often that these little kids at bedtime have a tactic that's been used forever. I'm sure the presiding officer's children, and I know my kids, we needed to get them to sleep, but they always wanted one more story. And then you had one more story. But parents suddenly learn that this bedtime story, for what it really is, we see it as a delaying tactic to stave off bedtime. And Americans see Republicans haul a request for one more vote, a made-up vote, for what it is, an excuse to put off a simple majority vote on Democrats' plan to cut taxes for the middle class. Of course, we know why Republicans are filibustering our plan to protect the middle class. They know it would pass if we held an up or down vote, a majority vote on that today. Our bill has the support of President Obama, it has the support of the Democratic caucus, and it has the support of the American people. A majority of Americans, including a significant majority of Republicans, agree taxes should remain low for the middle class and the top 2% should pay their fair share to reduce the deficit. As I said, the majority of Republicans agree. The only place there is no agreement is with Republicans in Congress. They once again have decided to obstruct rather than to legislate. So the Senate may not even get to debate the merits of our plan to cut taxes for 98% of American families. There's still time for Republicans to reverse course and drop another filibuster. They owe the American people a serious debate on this proposal. Finally, Madam President, just a word on national security. I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will allow us to debate a crucial cybersecurity bill before the end of this month. We hope to have a vote on this as early as tomorrow or the next day. Cybersecurity, a new word, but there's nothing more important to national security than doing something about cybersecurity. If we do not pass this legislation that is now before the Senate, if we don't do something about this, we're told by the experts that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. This legislation is extremely important. National security experts from the left, the right, and center say weaknesses in our cyber defenses are among the greatest threats facing our nation. And some say it's the greatest threat facing our nation. So Congress must act rapidly to address this issue. The House and Senate must also act before Congress leaves for August recess to pass the final version of the legislation initiating new Iran sanctions. It's passed here, it's in conference. The formal conference has been hard at work to complete this agreement. I've been clear I expect the negotiations to conclude soon so we can further tighten these sanctions against Iran. Sanctions are critical. It's a critical tool to help stop Iran's nuclear weapons program and ensuring the security of our ally, the State of Israel. Madam President, I would ask the Chair to announce. Oh, okay. The Republican leader's on his way.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Nebraska.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be set aside.
Without objection. Okay. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 2:15 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and the majority controlling the second 30 minutes.
Madam President, I come to the floor today to discuss a wholly predictable and a foreseeable economic disaster. And I ask why the Senate continues to waste valuable time while we continue barreling toward a fiscal cliff. In a little more than 5 months, the current tax rates are scheduled to expire for every single American, resulting in the largest tax increase in history. It's hard to imagine this massive tax increase is what the President wants. Just 2 years ago, he warned that you absolutely should not raise taxes in a poor economy. Yet today, the economy is actually in worse shape. So what does the President do? He calls for raising taxes on job creators, on small business owners, filing as individuals, on investment income, on all of those things that actually drive economic prosperity and hiring. The favorite talking point claims that all those making more than $250,000, well, they should just be taxed more, while those families reporting income of more than $250,000 may only make up about 2% of all tax returns. It is these citizens who are the owners of small businesses that employ 25% of America's workforce. These are the same small business owners that created 2/3 of the net jobs in the last decade. Now, I hear from small business owners in Nebraska every day, and they tell me if faced with a more expensive tax bill, they will be forced to cut costs elsewhere. In fact, according to the global accounting firm Ernst & Young, the Democrats' tax plan would result in 710,000 fewer jobs compared to simply keeping the current rate the same for all Americans. Now, the economic wreckage resulting from the tax hike doesn't stop there. In the same study, Ernst & Young estimates that these reckless policies will drive wages of hard-working Americans down by 1.8%. Furthermore, investment is estimated to decrease 2.4% as the tax on dividends increases. Well, what's apparent here? What's apparent is that less investment means less economic activity, which means fewer jobs. And it's really that straightforward. It's really that simple. Now, the President and the Senate Democrats apparently disagree over just how much to increase your taxes on dividend income. It is one of the few areas where their plans are not in lockstep, but both plans increase the dividends tax rate nonetheless. While their rhetoric continues to lambaste the ultra-wealthy, make no mistake, this tax increase will affect the vast majority of the middle class. You see, when examining historical IRS data, it is revealed that 68% of all tax returns showing dividend income are from those Americans with incomes below $100,000. 68%. While adding insult to injury, the President has proposed to increase taxes on the estate of deceased loved ones as well. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle not only pick up the President's proposal, but they make it worse. Believe it or not, they want to tax even more estates at even higher rates than the President. It is astonishing, and unfortunately, this reversal on the death tax will disproportionately impact ag states like Nebraska. In their opposition to the Democrat bill, the Nebraska Farm Bureau and the Nebraska cattlemen state that allowing the estate tax exemption to fall to $1 million would subject the typical full-time farm or ranch to the increased estate tax rate of, get this, 55%. I'd ask consent, Madam President, that the letters from these two groups be entered into the record.
Without objection.
According to the Tax Policy Center, the Senate Democrats' estate tax plan would hit over 48,000 estates with a $40.5 billion tax bill compared to an extension of the current rates. While an extension of current estate tax rates is not perfect, because I believe it should be repealed permanently, is far better than putting over 48,000 families, a large percent of them farmers and ranchers, on the death tax rolls. And I've said over and over again, death should not be a taxable event. Families should not have to sell the family business and lay off their employees to pay Uncle Sam a 55% tax rate on the value of the estate. So all of these ill-advised tax policies taken together add up to bad news for our economy and our country, bad news for our workers, and bad news for every American. The National Federation of Independent Businesses estimates that the tax increases would result in a U.S. economy that is 1.3% smaller than it is today. And that is an outcome none of us should strive for. So you ask, what's the alternative? Just last week, the senior senator from Washington laid out the Democrats' plan if they don't get their way on raising taxes. Hold the economy hostage and go over the fiscal cliff. Make sure everybody's taxes go up by the largest amount in the nation's history. Let the $110 billion sequester for this year strip our military of the resources it needs to keep us safe and impact domestic programs. Let the alternative minimum tax wreak havoc on our middle class, with the exemption actually falling below the median household income. In Nebraska alone, the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service estimates for 2012 there will be over 134,000 potential AMT tax returns compared with 16,000 in 2009. All told, this fiscal cliff will cost us between 3% and 5% of our entire gross domestic product, trillions of dollars in destroyed wealth, and a CBO-predicted economic recession. That's the plan. And it's astonishing to me that the Democrats would go to these lengths just to raise taxes on our country's economic engine. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle will claim taxes must be raised to address the mammoth deficit. And make no mistake, attacking our deficit should be job number one. However, on actual analysis, we see that the Democrats' claim is nothing but a mirage. According to the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation, the difference between the Democrats' plan to increase taxes and a simple extension of all the current tax rates is not even enough to cover 5 days of our government spending. And it's only 0.3% of our crushing $16 trillion national debt. This simply is not about our national debt or about deficits. It's about an ideological statement and nothing more. So after tomorrow's failed vote on these tax increases, it is my hope that we can get together and practice some common sense. Common sense would tell me, let's not raise taxes in a struggling economy. That used to be the President's position before he was up for re-election. Let's not punish our job creators and small business owners. Let's not punish our senior citizens and other savers that rely on dividend income. And let's not hinder passing down family farms and ranches from one generation to the next. Let's extend the current rates for as long as it takes to get to work on comprehensive tax reform and actually solve the problems of our tax code. Let's get serious and start working on the business the Americans sent us here to do. A massive tax increase will drive our economy to its knees and bring about another recession. We can't afford that. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Connor.
President.
Senator from Nevada.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Ronald Reagan once joked that if anyone wanted to understand Washington, D.C., just take a look at the roads that they design here. It's full of circles. You won't find too many roundabouts in Nevada, but in Washington, D.C., it seems to be part of the culture. Unfortunately, today Washington is going around in circles again. This time it's about whether Congress should raise taxes on small businesses at a time when our economy is struggling to grow. The sad reality is that we all live in a country with a temporary tax code. Right now, there is no certainty for an entrepreneur to start a new endeavor. There's no certainty for a small business that wants to hire a new employee. There's no certainty for businesses to invest in new equipment or in new buildings. What makes this situation worse is that the American public is now hearing from the majority party that they're willing to take our country off the fiscal cliff regardless of the economic damage it may cause by raising taxes, resulting in a smaller economy, fewer jobs, less investment, and lower wages. President Obama said in 2009, and I quote, "You don't raise taxes in a recession, because that would just suck up, take more demand out of the economy, and put businesses further in the hole." You know, I agreed with that statement in 2009, and I agree with that statement today. Let me give my colleagues another quote from President Obama after he supported extending all of the tax rates for 2 years in 2010. And I quote, "The bipartisan framework we have forged on taxes will provide businesses with incentives to invest, grow, and hire." I supported this bipartisan framework as a member of the House of Representatives, yet today, in a complete 180-degree turn, raising taxes and going over the fiscal cliff seem to be the new economic agenda. The plan of the majority party and the President are offering will cost Nevadans more than 6,000 jobs and will shrink the state's economy by $1.7 billion. Let me repeat that. The plan of the majority party and this President, what they're offering will cost Nevadans 6,000 jobs and shrink the economy $1.7 billion. Nationwide, this plan will hurt more than 700,000 jobs. Is this really the economic strategy Washington should be embracing? My home state of Nevada leads the nation in unemployment at 11.6%. We cannot afford to lose another 6,000 jobs. Divisive partisan politics does a great disservice to every American who is either out of work or taken a pay cut. Those who stay up late at night, wondering how they're going to make their mortgage payment, put food on their table, or clothe their children. While people across our country are struggling to get by, the Senate majority is pushing legislation that will actually hurt job creation. Congress should do everything within its power to encourage economic growth, and that begins with providing America with tax certainty. It is true that our current tax code is too costly, too complex, and too burdensome. There is no question that the tax code is unfair and needs an overhaul. But the best this President and the Senate majority can do is push a tax hike designed for nothing more than perceived campaign sound bites. Instead of election year campaign gimmicks, let's have an honest discussion on fundamental tax reform. Last summer, I reached out to President Obama to offer to work with him to fundamentally reform the tax code that would broaden the tax base by eliminating and closing loopholes and reducing the marginal tax rates both on individuals and businesses. This was an issue that I worked on in the House as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and I've continued to advocate here in the Senate. Yet here we are today, and instead of debating fundamental tax reform, we are taking another show vote on a tax proposal that would raise taxes on small businesses and cost jobs. Again, it'll cost Nevada 6,000 jobs. The Senate was created by our founding fathers to be the deliberative body. Yet once again, we find ourselves in a situation in which we will be unable to have an open debate on an issue that will affect every single American taxpayer. The Senate should be debating all tax proposals on a bipartisan basis and working to find consensus on areas to increase American competitiveness. Yet instead of providing our nation's job creators with clarity and economic certainty, some of my colleagues would rather engage in messaging for a perceived political gain. Raising taxes will do nothing to create jobs in Nevada or this nation. As the fiscal cliff draws nearer and nearer, the job growth remains stagnant. Congress should focus on long-term economic solutions that boost our recovery and provide businesses the certainty that they need to create jobs. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
call?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
For nearly 4 years now, Democratic leaders in Washington have claimed to want what's best for the economy, but done just about everything you can think of from a policy perspective to actually undermine the economy. Whether it's overwhelming businesses with red tape, burdening them with costly new health care laws, or punting on major economic decisions until after the election, Democrats have done everything you'd expect a party more focused on centralizing power in Washington than reviving a weak economy. And of course, we have the results to show for it. As a result of the Democrats' policy, we have fewer jobs today than the day the president took office. More signed up for disability assistance last month than got jobs. More people signed up for disability assistance last month than got jobs. And the percentage of Americans who actually can work but aren't is at the lowest point literally in decades. This is the sad legacy of this president's economic policies. And later today, we'll have a chance to cast a vote for more of the same, or a plan that will help us get off of this hamster wheel we've been on for the past 3.5 years. I'm referring, of course, to the very different proposals we'll vote on today for dealing with a looming tax hike coming in January. The Republican plan, which gives every American not only the certainty that their income taxes won't go up at the end of the year, but that Congress will deliver meaningful tax reform within a year, and the Democrat Senate plan, which raises taxes on 1 million small business owners at a moment when we're counting on them to create jobs, raise taxes on thousands of family farmers, and small business owners grieving the loss of a loved one. Leaves a middle-class tax hike in place and reforms absolutely nothing. We'd also like to vote on the president's plan, though it appears the Democratic friends will deny the president his vote. I'll leave it to others to explain the finer points of these plans, but one thing stands out. As I've indicated, the thing that stands out is the Democrats' proposal to raise the death tax. This is one of the bright ideas to revive the economy, to raise the death tax. It dramatically lowers the exemption level so more families actually get hit by it, and dramatically increases the amount of the tax itself. Under their plan, family members who inherit a farm or a ranch would have to write a check for 55% of the value of the property and equipment above $1 million, all but guaranteeing that tens of thousands of small and mid-sized family businesses across the country will be broken up and handed over to the government instead of passed on to the next generation. Now look, I know some Democrats will try to justify their vote on this stunningly bad proposal by saying they'll deal with the assault on family farms later. Wrong. The Democratic bill we'll vote on today, by not addressing the problem, makes the tax liability for these families even worse. A vote for the Democratic plan is to vote to put these farms and ranches literally out of business. There will be no standalone bill signed into law on the death tax, and anyone who says otherwise isn't being straight with the American people. But now there's one big difference between our plan and theirs. The most important difference is this. Only ours is aimed at helping the economy. Only ours is aimed at helping the economy. Only ours is meant to help struggling Americans in the midst of a historic jobs crisis. Theirs is meant to deflect attention from their continued failure to reverse this economic situation. Throughout this entire debate, not a single Democrat has come forward to claim that raising taxes on job creators will help the economy. Nobody's claiming that because it can't. The real motives are based on an ideological agenda, not an economic one. Now, ordinarily, Republicans would do everything we can to keep a plan as damaging as the Democrats' plan from passing. And the only reason we won't block it today is that we know it doesn't pass constitutional muster and won't become law because it didn't originate in the House. If the Democrats were serious, they'd proceed to a House-originated revenue bill as the Constitution requires. That said, the potential consequences of inaction on this issue are so grave that the American people deserve to know where their elected representatives really stand, truly stand on this issue. And so that's why, Mr. President, I'm announcing this morning Republicans will allow a simple majority vote on the two proposals I've described. And that's why we're also calling for a simple majority vote on the President's plan. He's the leader of the Democratic Party. He's been calling for a vote on his plan. I, for one, think we ought to give the President what he's asking for, a vote on his plan. So what I'm saying here this morning is we'll have a simple majority vote on the Senate Democratic plan, on the Republican plan to make sure no one's income taxes go up at the end of the year, and I would also recommend we have a simple majority vote on the President's plan. The only way to force people to take a stand is to make sure that today's votes truly count. By setting these votes at a 50-vote threshold, nobody on the other side can hide behind a procedural vote while leaving their views on the actual bill itself a mystery, a simple mystery to the people who sent them here. That's what today's votes are all about showing the people who sent us here where we stand. We owe it to the American people to let them know whether we actually think it's a good idea to double down on the failed economic policies of the past few years, or whether we support a new approach, whether we think it's a good idea to raise taxes on nearly 1 million business owners at a moment when millions of Americans are struggling to find work, or to do no harm and commit to future reform. 3 votes, 2 visions. 3 votes, 2 visions. The American people should know where we stand, and today they will. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
I thank the Chair. Mr. President, I suppose Senator McConnell, the leader, has given a preface for what I want to say. I think the American people should know where we stand on these important questions, and that's why I've come to the floor to indicate that I will vote in favor of proceeding to debate on S-3412, Senator Reid's proposal to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. But if the matter does come to full discussion and debate on the floor, as I hope it will, I will not vote for it in its current form. And I want to explain why. Mr. President, I feel strongly that the first thing the American people want us to do is get the economy going again so that the economy is creating jobs. And I'm convinced that the best thing Congress can do to restore economic growth and job creation is to enact a comprehensive bipartisan plan to balance our budget along the lines of the Bowles-Simpson Commission recommendations. Unfortunately, S-3412, excuse me, which is the so-called middle-class tax cut, which would extend the existing reduced tax rates on people making couples making less than $250,000, but would raise taxes on those making more than that does not represent such a plan. In other words, it is not a bipartisan plan to balance our budget in a way that will create job growth. Its enactment at this time, in my opinion, would only serve to preclude debate and action on exactly the broader type of reforms we need to fix our broken federal government fiscal system. Just imposing across-the-board tax increases for individuals and small businesses that make over $250,000 a year is neither tax reform nor the balanced deficit reduction agreement our country needs right now. I hesitate, and I will not hesitate as part of this kind of balanced bipartisan debt reduction, hopefully debt elimination plan, to vote to increase the amount of taxes that the wealthiest Americans are paying. But I won't do that as part of a scattershot approach. It's got to be part of a program that reduces spending, that reforms spending on our entitlement programs, which are the fastest growing element of our federal budget, and that reforms our tax system. And the bill before us is not such a plan. I've said over and over again that there's plenty of time this year to get a bipartisan balanced budget program passed in Congress, and that I would vote against both the President's partial repeal of the so-called Bush tax cuts and the Republican plan to extend all the cuts for another year. I think we can do better this year, and I think we must do better. I know that that's exactly what our constituents want us to do. We can cut spending, adopt tax reform, and entitlement reform. And while that hope is alive, I'm going to vote against both partial measures and proposals to put off the tough decisions about our economic future that our constituents elected us to make. I think both the Democratic plan, which is the subject before us right now on this motion to proceed, and Senator Hatch's plan don't make it. They're partial, and they basically kick the can down the road again without solving our economic problems and giving the private sector the confidence about our future to invest the trillions of dollars in cash they're sitting on now, which is the only thing that'll get our economy going and creating more jobs. And the private sector, businesses won't do that today because they don't know where this government of ours is going. They don't have a sense of certainty and confidence. So as I said, if for some reason the process that the Senate is facing today all changes and both the Democratic plan to raise taxes on people over $250,000 comes up for a vote, and Senator Hatch's Tax Hike Prevention Act, which extends all the tax cuts for another year, come up, I'll vote against both of them because I don't think they do what our country needs to be done. There's plenty of time, as I said, left this year to do what we have to do. Now, why am I going to vote to proceed to debate on either or both of these? If I'm opposed to each of them as they're drafted, it's because I think there's nothing more important we could do in this Congress than to begin to confront and debate the challenge of our time, which is to get our federal government back in balance, to make the tough decisions that will do that, and thereby to get our economy going and creating jobs again. Debate, yes. Let's not hide from debate. Let's confront it and deal with it as quickly as we can. But these two proposals, in my opinion, they don't do what our economy needs to be done. I'll just say a final word about the deep hole that we're in and about the idea of raising taxes on everybody making more than $250,000 but raising no taxes on people making less than $250,000. Mr. President, the truth is that we're in a deep hole in this country. We're heading toward what now has begun to be popularly called a fiscal cliff. The challenge to our government is whether we're going to have the courage, the honesty, the leadership qualities to come together across party lines and protect our economy and our country before we begin to go over the fiscal cliff. I know that requires us to make difficult decisions. Maybe it's easier for me to say because I'm not running for re-election this year, but honestly, I believe what the American people would most like us to do is do what we think is right, to do something that doesn't seem like conventional politics, to have the guts to enact tax reform, entitlement reform, and cut spending. That's really what they want us to do because that's what they know the country needs us to do. But let me come back to this $250,000. I know it's politically appealing, but the truth is to really balance our budget again, we're going to have to ask most every American to give a little something so that our country overall can grow and everybody will benefit. Sure, the people who are making the most should pay more in revenue, but I think we're at a point where we can't simply say to what we generally describe as the middle class, they don't have to give anything else. I think that would be wrong. That's not consistent with the revenue system we have now, which is a progressive and fair system. I want to build on that, reform it in some ways to make it more constructive and make it more likely to incentivize growth in our economy. But let's not take anything off the table. As our economy is as precarious as it is, as it faces very uncertain effects from economic troubles in Europe and even in China now, I think we've got to be very careful about raising anybody's taxes in the short run, that is next year. What we need is a long-term, balanced debt reduction program for America. So that's why I will vote to proceed to debate on these subjects we desperately need. But neither the Democratic or Republican approaches do what this country needs, and therefore, if they come to the floor and we have a debate, I'll try to amend them with something like the Bowles-Simpson recommendations. If that fails, I'll vote against them because we can do better than that, and the American people have a right to expect that we will. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor. Just the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.